Okay, welcome everyone to our spaces this week. This is our second one this week, and every week we have one at least either on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Today we have Ivan from Request Finance. Yeah, Ivan, go if you don't mind, just go ahead and introduce what Request Finance does and tell us a bit about yourself as well.
Sure, yeah, thanks so much. So Request Finance is really a crypto invoicing platform. That's how we started. And gradually over the years, it's evolved into this enterprise crypto payments app. It really began when MakerDAO actually approached us to say, hey, it's so difficult for us to track our invoices, payments, and all of that stuff, right? Like salaries, bounties, grants. And we just need one place to do it, and nobody's building something for that. And that's how the idea really began. But personally, me, how I got into crypto was that I was a development economist by education. I did some consulting for local governments. But in 2017, I remember that somebody asked me to write a research paper or that was going to become a book, right, on the macroeconomic implications of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And so back then I was like, what is this new thing called Bitcoin? And then I fell down the rabbit hole of researching into cryptocurrencies, found that they really aligned with what I thought finance could become. And that's how I started my own journey into crypto. I spent a good amount of time actually writing white papers, reports for regulators and central banks. So I did the Singapore Blockchain Ecosystem Report for 2 years. And recently, MAS, which is the Singapore Central Bank, had a global CBDC challenge report, and I was also the editor of that. Now I basically do content marketing for Request Finance.
Wow, nice. And oh yeah, I did see your name pop up at Talent at Web3. Yeah, I wanted to attend the session on Tuesday but couldn't.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
that's, that's
I'm also doing content, so yeah, I was interested. Yeah, let's move on from that. When you joined Request Finance, and can you give us some insights into how Request Finance first identified the problems that exist in payments and invoicing for businesses in Web3?
sure. So I actually joined Request Finance. Like, it's funny because like yesterday is my first year anniversary with Request Finance full time. So I've been with the company full time for about a year now. But the company really started way back in 2017. And if some of you are old enough to remember or been around long enough to remember, that was when everyone was launching an ICO. And one of the things that the co-founders did was launch an ICO around this thing called Request Network. And the idea was to build a protocol layer. It's a layer two built on top of Ethereum. And the idea was to provide a way for people to manage requests because you can send payments, but it's very difficult to request a payment and have that paid. And that happens all the time. If you think about bills, if you think about invoices, salary claims, like expenses claims, all of those things require a payment request. And back then it was just not possible in crypto. And so in 2017, we launched an ICO to fund the network. And we thought, hey, you know what? Everyone will see the opportunity. They'll just come and build something like Request Finance. Okay. We waited for 2 years. We offered grants and nobody came. Nobody built on top of the protocol. And so somewhere in late 2019, we decided that, okay, this is not working out. We just have to build it ourselves. Like the same way that YouTube's first video was by the YouTube team themselves. And so we decided, okay, you know what? Let's build something called Request Finance. And we started with invoicing. We launched in June of 2020 to a small group of users like MakerDAO and later on Aave. And then in January of 2021, we finally launched it to the open public.
Wait, so your first few customers were MakerDAO and Aave for Request Finance?
Yes.
Wow, that's massive. Yeah, how do you guys
Yeah.
go about acquiring those?
Right. So obviously back then the space wasn't as crowded. So we had conversations with these people, like MakerDAO was one of them, and they reached out to us and said, "Hey, like you guys are doing this thing that's solving for payments in Web3." And for them, obviously payments wasn't a big pain point, but like in terms of like consumer payments, right? Like e-commerce and all of those things weren't like a very high priority on their list. But what was a high priority is all the sort of unsexy stuff that goes on the back end for companies. When, for example, they manage a bunch of freelancers, they manage a bunch of KOLs who do marketing for them, and they send PDF invoices, and you got a wallet address, and they all port it over to an Excel spreadsheet. And when it comes time to pay them, it's messy, it's very error prone. And if you've got to pay more than 100 invoices, you spend days doing nothing but paying invoices. So that was how we basically discovered that there's a problem to be solved. And over time, later, of course, Aave, we knew Stani from quite a while back. And they said, hey, you know what? We also have a similar problem. And more of these Web3 companies and Web3 teams started to reach out to us and say, hey, I need something like that to manage all of my crypto payments. And that's how we started realizing we've got something going on here.
Nice, nice. And on that note, how do you ensure that those invoicings are tax compliant? Or
Sure.
with regards to regulation.
So I think that the important thing to realize is that crypto adoption is enterprises, right? So you've got consumers and you've got enterprise users, right? Consumers typically don't have much of a problem with crypto. You just got to make sure that you throw a bunch of incentives at them, make sure that it's faster, cheaper, whatever. But here's the thing, enterprises, they have to comply to a number of things, and one of which is tax. And the thing about tax is that it is incredibly complex and data heavy. That's in stark contrast to the way that cryptocurrencies were designed, which is to be pseudonymous, right? Wallet addresses don't have personal identifying information. There's no street address, there's no name to it, there's no identifying information to all crypto transactions, right? And so the problem for enterprises is that if you say, hey, why don't you consider using crypto payments? The challenge for an enterprise is that when they have to do their accounting for their own purposes, to know where they're spending the money on, or to report it to the tax authorities as income, it's just a long string of transaction hashes, right? So for example, you go to your Etherscan or your Polyscan at the end of the month or at the end of the financial year, and it's just, you have no idea what you transferred, to whom you transferred it, for how much it was in fiat terms, because don't forget, you don't report taxes or do your accounting in crypto. You do it in a fiat currency term. And so you have to figure out what the exchange rate was, what the value of BTC or whatever, however many coins you used was at that point in time where you spent it or received it. And that was that is still a major challenge, right, for enterprises when it comes to using crypto and stable coins. And so what we do is that we just add that data layer, that human readable data layer, which we call invoices. It tells you exactly what you spend, to whom you send it to. And we also have a partnership with Chainlink so that you get the exact exchange rate in fiat terms at the point in time at which you pay the invoice. And all of those things are needed for an accountant to do the job, basically.
Oh, okay. So simplifying the whole process of invoicing and making sure payments are tax compliant.
Yes.
For all businesses. Nice. And I also saw recently you guys partner with Superfluid to automate those recurring transactions.
Yeah.
Are you willing to share more about that?
Sure. So actually, like even before Superfluid, we had this thing called batch payments. So one of the reasons why people started using request finance heavily was because we developed this thing where you could select up to, I believe it's 500 invoices and pay them all in one transaction. So instead of having to cut, copy and paste wallet by wallet and make payment at one at a time, you could basically pay all of your contractors, all of your team members, all of your grants in a single, in more or less 2 or 3 clicks. And one of the things that we started to receive more requests for was this idea of streaming payments, because we also had another feature called recurring payments. So where you can, for example, if you work for a monthly salary, you can send a recurring invoice to your employer. But people were saying that, okay, sure, I can set it and forget it, but how about I get paid in a continuous stream? And that's where we obviously struck up the partnership with Superfluid. In January, we announced a open access program for people to sign up. We had a number of people try it out. We are still working on the integration. It should be ready in a couple of months' time. I can't tell you when. But once that happens, you will be basically able to stream salaries, billing, for instance. If you charge your clients in crypto, you'll receive that in a continuous stream. And depending on whatever intervals at that point.
Okay. And also on a note, you guys are currently only doing B2B enterprise solutions with crypto companies.
Yes.
Are there any other verticals you guys are exploring at this point in time?
So B2B just happens to be where the pain point is in crypto right now. It's the biggest use case, right? So in domestic payment systems, for example, you do have cases in other countries where there's very poorly developed banking and payments infrastructure. And I think that's where crypto can make a difference in like domestic payments. But the biggest use case is cross-border payments typically. So I would say that the reason why we chose to focus on that is because payments to a lot of people in different countries cheaply and quickly is a huge problem. So I think we are very much focused on the different enterprise use cases. For example, whether it's trade finance, For example, if a restaurant in Singapore wants to import cheese from France, that's typically done through an invoice, and that's typically settled in US dollars, all of which is very ideal for crypto. It's cheaper, it's generally faster, and it's just less difficult overall. And the other thing that we're also focusing on for B2B payments is actually payroll. Because what we are seeing is that there's more remote first global companies like us. So for example, Request is a team of 30 people in 15 different countries. How do you pay to different people in different countries in a way that's cheap? And of course, you've got the Web2 solutions like Deal.com, Bill.com, Melio Payments, but those things cost quite a bit. And so stable coins are a major way to do that. And we've got a salaries feature coming up right now. But crypto salaries and expenses and bonuses and things like that through stable coins and crypto.
Wow, nice. Is that considered alpha? Because I don't remember seeing that in any of the recent blogs.
So actually, if you go on, we've actually released the features in the app for a while now, but we just haven't been ready to announce it because we're still testing it with a few users and ironing out some kinks. And of course, we are also going to ensure that there's no security vulnerabilities as well. But it's there, right? It's just not ready for people to use, and that's why we haven't.
Okay, nice. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And other than that, you're currently still very focused on Web3 companies using these enterprise payments. I also understand you guys recently had Ride as a customer, which is more of a Web2 business, right?
Yes.
Are there more companies coming in from that area?
Yes. So I think that the reason why we focus on Web3 clients is because we are incredibly focused on customer feedback. So depending on what customers want, that's where we'll go. And naturally, the people who have the most need for the solution are the people who have most of their finances in crypto, which happens to be your DAOs, the Sandbox, Decentraland, Axie Infinity. Those are our users because they mostly have crypto treasuries. And so therefore, the pain points are the greatest there. But you're right. So companies like, for instance, who want to accept crypto payments, they'll run into the same problems eventually, right? If I'm going to accept crypto payments, how do I account for it? I can't show my accountant a string of transaction hashes and say, hey, go figure it out. I know some companies do that, but it's incredibly difficult. And it just makes life really difficult for you and your accountant when it comes to your financial skills. So yes, we're seeing more traditional Web2 companies start to adopt solutions like us just because we've been built to handle crypto payments in a compliant manner, and there really are very few tools that do that. Yeah, but I still think that's still quite a while away. And I think we've got to put more effort into actually reaching out to people, especially in the cross-border payment space, and say, hey, there's this thing called stablecoins. It's cheaper and faster and a better way to transfer money. And that's something we have to focus on.
I see. And other than that, are there any other future developments for the product? I understand you already talked about salary and payroll. I also saw something with regards to you farming products directly on the platform itself. Yeah, if you don't mind sharing more on that.
So I think the goal for us is to ultimately become a sort of a one-stop shop for crypto CFOs and COOs. And one of the things that we obviously look at is not just managing accounts receivable and accounts payables, but it's also what you do with your treasury. Now, of course, you have a lot of, for example, like Aave, right? Like they don't need us to manage their treasury for them. But as more companies start to come into the space, they just kind of want simple ways to maximize their returns on their crypto treasuries, typically in stable coins, especially if you have Web2 companies coming into the space. They don't know a lot, but they just want to get exposure to some of these structured products. So we are talking to a number of both decentralized as well as like CDFI lending pools to see how we can offer yield type products in our platform subject to regulatory clearances and things like that.
Okay. Sherry, do you have any questions as well for Ivan?
Yeah, I would love if you can explain a little bit more about how Request Finance's business model actually works. Because what's really interesting is that when we think about invoicing products and software in the Web2 world, oftentimes they follow like a B2B SaaS model where there's some kind of like recurring subscription costs that the companies pay. But I'm wondering like what that business model looks like for Request Finance in its current state, and then how are you guys thinking about evolving it as you develop this product out into different features, as well as develop it for different customers that you mentioned, like doing more normal payments cross-border as they come into the product as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that people forget is that even if you're a Web3 company, you still have to have a business model, a revenue model. I guess it's even more relevant for us because we are more like a SaaS platform. But right now we are pricing for growth, so we don't actually charge subscription fees. So setting up an account is completely free on the platform. We only take a transaction fee that's capped at 0.1% of all payments. So sending an invoice doesn't cost you anything. It's only when you pay or do something that's related to payments, we charge us a fee of 0.1%. We've got other features as well, like escrow, where we charge slightly more, like 0.2 to 0.3%. And of course, if we've got yield type products, we probably aim to take something like 1 or 2% of that we generate. So right now it's primarily through transaction fees. So it's a low margin, but a high volume game. And that's what we're trying to do as we price for growth. But it's very possible that apart from these premium features, we could also, in some point in the future, look at charging just a standard subscription model.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. One thing I'm wondering though is it is actually pretty smart for growth to basically charge like this transaction fee that makes it effectively free without as much like cost of entry for like new customers coming in. But what are you building in the product to actually create like a retention loop? Could you actually explain how you keep people using request finance time after time when you don't necessarily have that kind of forced retention that like a subscription model may have?
So I think there's a natural stickiness to the product as well, because a lot of these people, when they manage their expenses, their salaries, their payments and payouts, as they've got all their contractors onboarded onto the platform, all their employees onboarded onto the platform, there's a lot of inertia for people to want to just switch platforms, right? So I guess the way that we basically make ourselves more sticky is by offering more and more solutions that cover what a CFO or COO needs to do within a Web3 company, whether that's treasury management, whether that's managing day-to-day payments or like salaries and reimbursing expense claims. All of those things become, as a package, a lot more difficult to switch away from. Whereas in the early days, when we were just purely an invoicing platform, of course, there was not a lot of things to keep people on the platform. The moment they stopped needing invoices, then we weren't such a compelling sell. But I think as we build out all these different feature sets, it becomes very complicated to move your employees from one platform to another, right? Which is generally the feature of enterprise SaaS platforms.
Makes a lot of sense. And so on that note, though, I do wonder because it makes sense that you started out with a singular use case that made sense to communicate and expanded it to a much more complete suite of products that like a finance manager or a CFO at a Web3 company would manage. I'm seeing a lot of these new products actually come out, though. I think there's one called Headquarters that I think recently launched or at least started in Singapore. That's essentially looking to automate or make some of the back office processes for Web3 companies work better. And so there's actually quite a few of these guys popping up. So I'm wondering, like, how does Request Finance actually think about establishing its own competitive edge in this space as more people are starting to look into this opportunity? And then alongside of that, I've spoken to some of the Web2 guys like VoloPay who are now starting to think about how they can service crypto clients because obviously they're looking for a new total addressable market. So how is Request going to think about maintaining its edge when there's a few of these other players that are also starting to emerge?
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think it's interesting that we see more and more competition coming in, which we think is a good thing, right? Because I think if you say to me that, hey, we're doing this crazy new thing, and guess what? There's no competition. Either you're to see a really big trend or there's a huge problem because nobody wants to do it. And so I think it's just it is a validation of what we think is the right direction to go into. But how do we differentiate ourselves? I think one of the ways in which we stand out, and this is customers, we ask them, hey, why do you choose Request over other options that are out there right now? And one of the things they say is because we're a Web3 native platform. So for one, we are actually non-custodial. So you manage your own wallets, you manage your own funds, and at no point in the payment process do funds come under our control. And a lot of large Web3 native companies like Decentraland love that. They want it that way. Whereas a lot of I would say half Web2 companies typically have a more centralized setup where you have to fund a crypto wallet that is basically a custodial wallet or something like that. which is fine. It may work for some companies, but I think a lot of the Web3 native companies still want to have that decentralized setup. Our invoices, for instance, are stored on IPFS. We don't get access to the invoicing data. We can't actually read those invoices. And so I think that's a big difference for us. We try to maintain as much decentralization and privacy preserving features as we possibly. And I think the other thing that also makes us stand out is the fact that we're not focused on building out this feature set alone. Right? So for example, streaming payments, we decided to partner with Superfluid instead of building something from scratch. And we also look at partnerships with, for example, DeFi platforms right now as we're looking to offer like yield type products. And I don't think that's very common in the Web2 world where we tend to rely, okay, I guess to some extent they rely on APIs, but generally the idea is to dominate the market and build out everything themselves.
Interesting that you mentioned the non-custodial point for Web3 native companies. Most of the time that generally I would say rings true. But what about these non-crypto native companies? You touched upon it a bit earlier. How are you thinking about bringing on these beachhead customers? And wouldn't they rather work with Boldo Pay or some of these existing Web2s that they're more familiar with? Or do you think that there's a specific way that you can actually speak to this audience, understand their needs so that they're comfortable with this more DeFi, more crypto native, Web3 native kind of solution?
So I think that actually on our platform, that's why we're trying to offer more custodial options as well as non-custodial options and letting people choose. Right now, it's primarily non-custodial, but it's possible, for instance, you could use a custodial wallet like Fireblocks, right?
I see.
Because Fireblocks, I believe, is I think they're Wallet Connect enabled, and so we support any Wallet Connect enabled wallet to connect to Request Finance. So you could actually use a custodial wallet depending on what your service provider uses. So, for example, if you use Fireblocks, you could actually technically integrate with Request Finance. Now, the other thing to also just note is that we're not like a pure Web3 siloed solution. So for instance, where you have to do accounting, that's typically done in a Web2 accounting software like Xero or QuickBooks or Intuit. And we have integrations with all of those things as well. So one of the ways that we are trying to convince more traditional companies to try out our platform if they're already considering looking at crypto payments is, hey, we already integrate with whatever accounting software that you use, and accountants are familiar with us. And that's the way they say, okay, if my accountant recommends it, yeah, that's the tool I'll go with.
Wait, could you just clarify that? Which accounting software could you actually use that's compatible with Request Finance today?
So right now we have an integration with Xero and QuickBooks.
I see. Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
Obviously big ones. I see.
Yeah. So if you're already using that stack in your accounting, it's super easy to make the decision to say, okay, you know what, I can actually switch over to using Request Finance because I can export all that data and it reconciles with my general ledger.
Got it. That's super cool. And are you working with these guys at all at channel co-marketing, or has it just been they're just enabling Request Finance on the platform and you guys are still going out and doing your own business development with the different end users that would use Request Finance?
Yeah, so actually we are working with, for example, one of the largest channel partners of Xero in Singapore. And yeah, so we try to find as much co-marketing opportunities as possible. So for us, it's accounting service providers or their representatives locally. We try to work with them to educate them about what happens if your client wants to actually deal with crypto payments or stable coins. But because they know us, we become go-to solution when they recommend their clients who are interested in starting to do crypto payments. And then the other thing that, of course, we try to do at least in the Web3 space, which will eventually translate to the Web2 space when people come on board, is co-marketing opportunities with people like BlueJay, of course, stablecoin issuers like XSGD, Circle is another major co-marketing partner that we are starting to work with as well. And then, of course, the wallet providers, right? Because we bring a tremendous amount of that utility to the wallets whenever we integrate with them. So that's been the way that we try to reach out as much as possible to different target audiences. And then there's also layer one, because we're a chain agnostic solution, although we're built on top, we can support any EVM compatible chain and sometimes even non-EVM compatible chains as well. So every time we integrate those chains, we allow people to have an invoicing and enterprise crypto payment solution that didn't exist before on that chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually really like the point you brought up about just more system co-marketing, right? Because none of these parts of the stack really can live in a silo, and it's really about coordinating all of them together. On the point around Blue SGD, one of the things that we're really excited about is how Blue SGD can be used as a easier way to facilitate remote payments or / payroll or crypto native payroll for staff. And one of the areas that like we would be super excited to continue working with you on to build that outreach to different end partners that would integrate both, if not maybe us plus another solution for something like that. Let's go back a little bit. I would love to just hear a bit more about the traction story and like what you've seen with traction so far with Request Finance. And so I'm wondering, right, what were some of the first big clients that really, maybe beyond like Maker and Aave as they started out, but what was that growth story post the first few customers? Like how has that been? And then what percentage of that really has come from stablecoin volume versus like native tokens, etc.?
It's funny because like we actually grew too fast for ourselves. So when I joined the company, we had something like 150 signups a week, and now we have touching 300 a week. We just had this tremendous amount of pure word of mouth volume that just took us by surprise. People start to need this a lot. And one thing that does help in terms of like the traction is one of the things that we do in terms of marketing is that we have use cases with some of our key accounts, right? So for instance, when we had the Sandbox as a client for about 3 or 4 months in, we did a use case with them to just run them through their thought process on what their experience has been using Request Finance, why they chose Request Finance over all other alternatives, and how Request Finance has helped them. Every time we do one of those high-profile use cases, their entire community tends to pay attention. And then that's how we get people like Decentraland, that's how we get people like Axie start using the platform, because if it's good enough for the market leaders, it's good enough for them. So that's one thing. A lot of it has been word of mouth. A lot of it has been these large key accounts that are willing to do co-marketing with us. And interestingly, it's also stablecoin issuers or these native L1s, right, who say, hey, now I've got a solution that brings utility to my token in a different way. So for instance, so of course, naturally, we started out with Maker. That's why we have got DAI as such a large part of our platform. But just to give you a breakdown of our currencies on the app, we support about 150 different tokens on 14 different chains. But 55% of that transaction volume has been mostly US dollar denominated stablecoins, of which about 30-something% is USDC by Circle, 13% is DAI by obviously, and then another 3% or something like that is CUSD, which is on CeeLo, and about another 11% is USDT. So those have been a major part of our payments volume. And then the rest just falls into the category of like native tokens of L1s, when they pay out as like grants, bounties, or the Sandbox, their own native token as well. Sort of almost like an ESOP, right?
Sorry, just to make sure I heard it correctly, what percentage was USDC versus DAI?
So they're very similar. So USDC is something like 13%, and USDC is 30-something%, and DAI is like 13%.
Oh,
but it is so it's quite a big difference, sorry, but it's USDT Tether that's quite closely tied with DAI. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And what do you think going forward are going to be some of the bigger challenges to adoption? It sounds like the interest and excitement is there. It's always good when there's more volume of business coming in than you can possibly support. But tell me a bit more about what are some of the challenges that you have to work through.
So obviously, one of the big challenges that we have is actually the fact that crypto payments still require on and off ramps. Most people still don't pay for everyday stuff like your pasta or your rent or your electricity bills in crypto, right? And so at some point, we still need to work with a lot of on and off ramp providers that can be stablecoin issuers. So for example, StraitsX in the Eurozone and Circle in the US. We rely very heavily on these partners to off ramp our users, on and off ramp our users from fiat to crypto. So stablecoin issuers are a big part of that. And then there's also potentially we're looking at other on and off ramp providers to solve that issue because most people still want to be able to spend fiat. So that's a major challenge that we face, right? On and off ramping. And then the other major challenge that we see is I think there needs to be more cooperation in this space, which kind of goes back to your point about competition and how we see ourselves competitively. One of the things that we always tell our partners and just generally people that we meet in the space is that you got to grow the pie before you start fighting over slices of that pie. Because in the grand scheme of things, crypto is a very small pie compared to, for example, the total payments volume in the world. So, for example, just cross-border payment volume alone is something in the ballpark of 150 something trillion dollars, I believe. And that's that's quite staggering to think of, but that's just one segment of the global payments space, right? So I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration among people in the crypto ecosystem to go out there and grow the use of the adoption of cryptocurrencies in the real world, in the real economy. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're so eager to partner with key people like Fuji Finance, obviously, to go out there and grow that pie of crypto adoption.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is I think there's like cooperation that should happen within like the Web3 space. And I think you're starting to do that already with the stablecoin issuers, as well as the guys building primitives, streaming payments like Superfluid. But there's also a part of it that's around cooperation with the existing real world finance players as well. And I think that's where that bridge is important because again, they're maybe not as familiar with the underlying technology as some players that are Web3 native, but it's equally important to be able to get them on board because they may actually own the end customers at the end of the day.
Yes. So actually, one of the things I forgot to mention is that another major segment of users that use Request Finance, apart from Web3 native companies, it's actually service providers that serve Web3 native companies. So that's your PR agencies, law firms, accounting firms, marketing agencies. These are the people who also use Request Finance, right? Because typically when they work for these Web3 companies, they obviously get a request to be billed in crypto or stable coins most of the time. And so we actually spend a lot of time educating some of these people. So for example, there was a media intelligence company like Muckrat in Singapore that wanted to accept crypto payments from their clients because that's a huge part of the revenue that we're missing out whenever they said, hey, we want to work with you, but we can't accept crypto payments. So we sat down with them and we explained to them what a wallet was, what kind of wallets were best to use, and then just get them onboarded on that whole process. So I think there's still a lot of education that's required and a lot of work to be done, even in the traditional space. Now, then there's also, of course, the fact that as an enterprise crypto payments platform, compliance is a big part of what we do, right? So there's naturally going to be cooperation with tax authorities, regulators, and things like that. We want to try to promote integration with existing systems, right? We don't want to say, hey, you know what, crypto is a way for people to evade taxes, crypto is a way for people to launder dirty money. It's a way to document, we are a way to document payments in a compliant manner, right? So that you can integrate with the existing financial and economic system that's already out there. So I think that's the goal for us. Not to necessarily replace what's out there, but just to do it better.
Yeah, for sure. And I really like the point that you brought up about the go-to-market should actually be the outward spreading of the first and second degree connections from the Web3 native companies themselves. Because of course, like not all the vendors are going to be Web3 native. They're going to be like media agencies, PR agencies, design firms. And so you like slowly onboard through your own network. And then soon enough, you get like some level of critical mass in certain pockets where the stable coins or whatever currencies are being used to be paid for those services, and using Request Finance obviously to do the requests and document some of it as well. One thing that, sorry, Ivan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that you're absolutely right, because these are the people that are from the Web2 or traditional space that will actually see the use cases for crypto payments. For instance, one of the things that you can do very easily with stablecoins in Request Finance is that you can set up a recurring invoice. So for instance, if you're a PR company or a design agency that's on a retainer with, for example, the Sandbox, you can set a recurring monthly invoice to be automatically sent to the HR, the finance department of the Sandbox. And they can pay you on time every single time because it's easy for them to manage billing with stable coins and with programmable money in general. And that's how you get traditional people who are not Web3 natives to see the value of, wow, I can do this in a way that's far easier than what I could possibly do with a PDF invoice, right, and bank
Right.
transfers.
One thing I wanted to go back to when we were talking about on and off ramps is actually, I would love to understand, like, how do you guys do it today versus like how you are planning to do it in the future? Like, how actually would you actually get some of the payments out into fiat for some of the customers in today's world?
There's an official answer. No, I'm kidding. But no, but so that is a major challenge, right? So some of the ways that we obviously, okay, the default method that we try to do is to really work with stablecoin issuers. So we were in Paris for ECC recently, and we had a discussion with the Monerium team. We've been working over a year now, and one of the things that we try to do is to push the end users to off-ramp through these stablecoin issuers, and it's super easy, huh? Like, for example, with Monerium or like with XSGD, all you need is a local bank. In the Eurozone, for instance, all you need is an IBAN bank account. And if you want to off-ramp through Monerium, it just gets sent straight fee-free to your bank account anywhere in the Eurozone. And it's likewise, if you use StraightSets and you live in Singapore, you want to off-ramp your XSGD, same process, right? It's a pay now or bank transfer to your fiat wallet, right? So that's the default. Work with stablecoin issuers to on and off ramp. But the more tricky thing is where people want to go from like crypto to fiat. And that's still something that we're trying to work out in a compliant manner. And that will have to involve it will have to involve basically someone receiving crypto and paying out in fiat. That's not something that we've quite fully worked out yet.
Gotcha. Anthony, any questions from your side or ones that have been sent in from the audience?
For myself, I guess I'm more curious on, let's say, since you guys are handling a lot of payments from many different Web3 native companies and even Web2 companies, do you guys see, like, how many percent of that is actually from DAO? And also, is it really moving a lot towards remote first companies where most of, like yourself, Request Finance, most of the employees are just spread all over the world? And yeah, just those two.
So the question of can we give an exact breakdown? The answer is no, unfortunately, because we're not a data hungry like Web2 company that scrapes all the information we can get. So unfortunately, we, as much as we would love to, can't see that data, but we do get a sense by talking to our users, which we do a lot. And you're absolutely right. One of the things that we find when we talk to our users is that a lot of them are remote first Web3 native teams who hire globally, and it's just incredibly difficult to get payments. So for example, one of the stories that we heard was one of our users actually they were looking to hire a developer in Indonesia, and not necessarily in Jakarta, but somewhere in, I believe it was like East Java or something like that. And one of the problems were like, hey, yeah, I can take the job, but here's a minor hiccup. I don't have a bank account. What am I going to do? And so we said, well, the simple answer is use XIDR, right? Which there's an Indonesian stablecoin, Indonesian rupiah stablecoin. And that way, when you want to spend in a big city, you can off-ramp through StraightSets. And so a lot of it tends to happen from the point of view of managing payroll for global teams. That's a major use case for Request Finance. But the other thing is also, for example, dispersing of grants and dispersing of, like bounties and things like that. That was also another major use case. And the other thing that we've also been seeing is actually expenses. So for instance, if you go to ECC, you paid, for example, I believe it was something like 400 USDC. Now in a traditional company to get reimbursed, I would have to go to Polyscan and say, hey, I paid 400 USDC on Polygon. Here's the proof of transaction. And the finance department in a Web2 company would have no idea what to do with it. And so that's why the ability to reimburse expenses natively in crypto using Request Finance is another major use case that we're also seeing. And it typically is these crypto native companies whose employees spend in crypto or pay in crypto for stuff and they have to get reimbursed, or they work around the world and it's just easier to receive stable coins for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, on that note, actually, I only have a few questions left for anyone in the spaces who have a question for Ivan or Sherry on Request Finance or Blue Jay. Just go ahead and request to speak. Yeah, and if not, I'll go on with my question. With regards to crypto payments, where do you see the trends going in the next 1 to 3 years?
Wow, it's hard to forecast anything right now, but I do see that crypto payments are going to gradually replace some of the, they're going to gradually eat into some of the market for cross-border payments. And the reason I see that is because that the innovations in stablecoins, in DeFi, and all these other crypto primitives are just moving at a speed that is far quicker than whatever central banks are trying to do with their various consortia to improve some of the legacy problems with cross-border payments and banking in general. So I do see stablecoins as a major element of payments going forward in the next 1 to 3 years. And it's funny because that's born out of our own data. So we publish a monthly report on the user statistics of Request Finance, right? How many users, who's paying in what kind of currencies, which are the most popular payment networks. And so at the point in time where the Luna crash was going on, all of us were looking at each other and waiting for that to show up in the numbers, but it kept going up even as everyone was talking about, oh, crypto is going to enter the bear market, it's over, stablecoins are dead, we were seeing double-digit growth in payments volume month on month. And that surprised us. And that told us that, hey, something else is going on here. Like crypto, especially stablecoins, are being used to pay salaries, are being used to pay expenses, bills, and things like that in the real world. And so I don't see that going away in the next 1 to 3 years. In fact, I see that growing more and more. Now, the question of where do you think those killer use cases will be? I think it's going to be first in cross-border payments, and then it's just going to flow out into more domestic sort of enterprise payments. So I do see that becoming a major trend, at least in 3 to 5 years. I wouldn't say 1 to 3 years, but 3 to 5.
Okay. And yeah, on your point earlier, having adoption coming from people, remote first companies, and also first and second degree order companies that interact with Web3 native businesses like law firms and marketing agencies. I think a huge part is still with education providing some key knowledge and understanding to these Web2 businesses about having to adopt crypto payments. And yeah, like for education wise, are you guys doing it as a BD thing, or I don't know, how do you see people understanding crypto better and yes, the key benefits of cross-border payments being much faster and more efficient?
So typically we like to focus on where the pain points are greatest, and we like to do it in cooperation with partners like BlueJay. And it's incredibly important that we go out as an entire solution suite to go and educate the market on what stable coins are, like how do you, and addressing all of those objections that traditional companies may have about handling crypto payments and stable coins. So yes, of course, naturally there's a part of our education that's very focused on our existing customer base and Web3 natives, because there's a clear product market fit there. But I think broadly, if we are looking out in the long term, is how do we grow crypto adoption among people who haven't yet understood the full potential of crypto and crypto native payment rails? And that's where, of course, it's incredibly important for us to be able to work with people like BlueJay, wallet providers, all these other people who play different roles in the ecosystem, to go out there together and tell people, hey, this is how you can actually do your current business better. So it's not about selling a dream, right? It's about saying that if you right now have a team of 50 developers spread across Southeast Asia, you can actually pay them faster, cheaper, and they can do so much more with the stable coins that you see. But whether it's putting them out through lending protocols to get higher yields than what they could get with their local banks. So all of those things require a lot of education and co-marketing efforts with our partners. Kind of goes back to what I was saying about that we have to grow the pie first before we start thinking of how to divvy up that pie. And I think partners and co-marketing opportunities like this are really helpful for that.
Nice. Okay, and yeah, on that note, actually for those who are still in the spaces with us right now, you guys can kindly go to our Disc. I've pinned the tweet. We have the PO app going. So you guys just need to go in there and fill up a Google form, and you guys will receive the Request Finance Spaces PO app. And yeah, I think I really like our PO apps. It spins and yeah.
It's amazing.
Gives a nice color. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Ivan. And if anyone else here has any more questions, kindly just request to speak. Really, don't be shy. Ivan's a very nice guy.
Sorry, I couldn't help but notice the pun every time I said request to speak.
Yeah.
I don't mean to have a word play with that, but
Oh, I see.
So that was a complete dad joke. I just have to point it out.
I saw Elias from Win. He was here just now and he just dropped off. I thought he was going to ask a question.
oh yeah.
I think you two have actually met before. Am I mistaken?
Sorry?
Ivan? You've actually, I think he dropped off, but you've actually met him before from Wins, right?
We haven't met, but so I did speak to him when he was back in his office in Dhaka. Like we had a call. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So super cool.
Okay. Yeah, not really anyone wants to ask a question today. Yeah, no worries. Even I guess for the users here, they can just probably check out Request Finance and the blog for monthly updates, right? You're saying?
Yeah, so we have a monthly update for users, investors, and anyone else who's curious about Request Finance. You can go to request.finance. You can follow us on Twitter. You can open an account and just try it out for yourself. It's completely free. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or any one of our team on our socials. We're particularly active on Twitter. We're also active on Discord for those of you who are already there. But if not, reach out to us on Twitter, DM us. Very happy to speak to you about what we do.
Nice. Yeah, thank you, Ivan, for your time tonight. And just one last reminder for everyone here, just go over to our Discord and just fill out the Google form and you'll get the POAP delivered to your wallet. Yep. And yeah, for Ivan, I'll send it to you directly. But,
Awesome.
Oh yeah, are you also going Korea?
Yes, we're going. In a few hours, I'm gonna be boarding a plane with Sherry to the Korea Blockchain Week.
Sick.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool.
Thanks so much,
Kindly
man.
document more. And yeah, you also have your own blog.
Yeah.
I did read for
So
your comments on ECC.
yes.
Go on.
Yeah, so I guess you can, for those of you who are slightly more old-fashioned like me, you can follow me on LinkedIn as well, Ivan Hong. I write some of my personal thoughts as well on Space and on Medium as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks again, Ivan. And yeah,
thank you so much.
Request Finance. Yeah,
Thanks so much,
everyone
guys.
as well. And for Ivan and Sherry, have a safe flight soon. Get some sleep maybe before the flight. I don't know if it's possible. Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Take care.
you so much.
Yep. Good night.